record. Okay, you are live.
Yes, I'm live on YouTube. I'm Skumuto Khatebe from the University of Zululand. I'm going to be the chair of this meeting today. Firstly, I would like to greet the VC, Professor Yunis. Thank you very much. Yeah, it is the first time having professor in this workshop. Like VC, the Vice Chancellor, not the professor. So I'm going to be the chair of this day. And before I proceed, I would love to remind you the rules of the house rules for the day. Greetings to the young. The first thing is that, ladies and gentlemen, please let us minimize movement during the talk here. When the speaker is on the stage, please remain silent and stand still. We'll give you time to go out to the bathroom, and also we'll give you time to socialize, to go in your social network and post it to everything. And remain quiet during the speech. I hope that's clear. Okay, we're going to have our first speaker today. The man I'm introducing now, he's an NRF rating since 1994. He published 80 peer reviews, and also previously he was the vice principal at VET and the chair of HEQC, which is a Higher Education Quality Council. He is also a professor of civil engineering at VET, research in cement and concrete material science. The man I'm introducing, he is the Vice Chancellor of Plaatje University. Can you please, ladies and gentlemen, join the hands together to welcome Professor Prof Ballim.
So, good morning, everybody. And firstly, I must apologize that I wasn't around when you first arrived. It is improper for the head of a household not to greet the guests when they arrive. And I was wrong not to be here, but I'm afraid I was out of town at the time. So I'm making up for that by giving you a belated welcome. I hope you've all enjoyed your time here so far. For those of you who are from outside of the Northern Cape area, since this is the cradle of humankind, welcome home. So thank you, it's good to have you back. I also wanted to say that I was a little bit disappointed that you arrived here and you weren't introduced to the campus. You are in what is now newly built construction. And we've been very, very careful to ensure that the campus is an expression of living art. So as you walk into the main square, if you look across, there's louvers on the front of the building. We spent quite some time cutting, using a laser, out of those metal sheets. We cut out the story of the development of Kimberley. So you start by seeing Driekops Eiland images, and I'm going to come back to that point a little later. And as the narrative grows, you see people arriving, and then the big whole metaphor, and eventually Kimberley emerges as the city on the top of the panels. That's not the art. The art is when the sun shines on it and the shadows that fall behind tell a moving story as the sun moves. Okay, so please pay attention to that. The mosaic, red mosaic work on the front panel is drawn from our motto and our logo. It's a kokerboom which has very specific spiritual significance in this part of the world. But we're also, I don't know if you noticed, the very Catholic image of the one star that is out. It looks in Tenebris Lucet, for those of you who go to church often enough. But it's also the narrative of the relationship between individuals and society, which when you think about it, is probably the most important question of the Romantic period, which is, how do individuals relate to the rest of society? More importantly, what is the role of the intellectual? And in part, I want to cover that question in this lecture. The grey and the grey shaded mosaic work that you see here is reproductions of quartz zeolites that occur here in the Northern Cape. If you cut across and you polish it, you get those grey colors. So we've tried very hard to express the reality of our sense of place as we exist on this campus. Incidentally, these spaces are all heated or cooled by the fact that we have pipes about 1 meter underground. And since the temperature underground remains more or less constant, when it's hot up here, the cooler air comes up from the bottom. When it's cold up here, the warmer air comes up. This pipe runs in all the concrete, so even the concrete is warmed. So we don't spend a lot of energy heating or cooling the spaces here. Every room has access to natural light. So if the lights go off, if there's no energy, we don't have to rely on artificial light all the time. These rooms are designed acoustically, so we don't have, you can hear me at the back without a microphone. So that's, I mean, we've been very careful to minimize energy, and so pay attention to some of that as you walk around. When you enter, there's that statue of a hand on the front. It's called Direch, which in Afrikaans is a very nice interpretation of 3 concepts: correct, right, and the law. It's a local artist who made it, and it's made from scrap metal. So please do enjoy the expression of visible and accessible art, because we took it very seriously. However, that's by way of word of welcome. I'm here to talk about the concept that's been spoken of very often, mainly from students, which is decolonizing the curriculum. And I thought I'd reflect on some of the thoughts and some of what I try to understand what it means. I want to say that, and let me start with an apologia. I haven't read any coherent argument for what decolonizing the curriculum means. I haven't seen any serious writing on subject. And so what I'm saying is I'm really responding to what I hear people shouting. I hear media statements, I hear statements often being made, and it is distilled into a question, which is, how do we decolonize the curriculum? What I'm about to argue is that the question is improperly phrased, that you're asking the wrong question. And if you ask the wrong question, you must necessarily arrive at the wrong answer. I'm going to rely on arguments of epistemology. For those of you who have not met the word before, biology, bios, logos, study of life, geology, study of the earth, epistemology, study of knowledge. To put it more plainly, how do you know that you know? Okay, that's epistemology, study of knowledge. Let me give you an example. How do you know that you should put on a jersey this morning? Exactly, people say it's cold. Well, how do you know that it's cold? You say, my body tells me. Well, what is your body telling you? That the temperature has dropped, and my body has a mechanism for detecting reduced temperature, correct? So therefore, my body is able to detect reduced temperature, and therefore I put on a jersey. Okay, wrong. It's quite easy to show you. You put this hand in very cold water, yeah? This hand in very hot water, okay? And keep it there for a few minutes. Then put both hands into warm water. This hand tells you the water is hot, and this one tells you the water is cold. So for the same temperature, you get 2 different answers. What have you proven? The body cannot detect temperature. So let's go back to the original question. How do you know that you should wear a jersey? All you have to do is say, I don't know, but I feel more comfortable when I wear a jersey. I don't know why. That's the best you can offer. So the question of how do you know that you know is a very serious question. In other words, we accept and acknowledge interpretations of the empirically observable world based on very often just habit. You don't need to know the theoretical relationship between eating and remaining alive to know that if you don't eat, you'll die. Yeah? Despite the fact that you don't understand the chemistry of digestion, if you don't eat, you'll die. That evidence is sufficient to make you eat. Why you should eat and what the reason is, the relationship between eating and remaining alive, is actually not that important. All you need to know is empirically, if I don't eat, I'll die, so I better eat. Yeah? Am I making that point? So how do you know that you know is an important question when it comes to engaging with knowledge. But let me come back to the question, how do we decolonize the curriculum? And I'm going to present essentially 4 criticisms. It's a badly phrased question. My first concern, in the way that I hear the argument going around, is that it is almost entirely based on the principle that curriculum equals content. So people say, more Amilcar Cabral and less John Stuart Mill. More Steve Biko and less Shakespeare or whatever. Which of course makes the first fundamental error, and that is to believe that curriculum equals content. Curriculum is not content. Content is simply the vehicle by which we deliver the curriculum. Curriculum is about what are the learning opportunities you want to develop. How do you pedagogically approach that? What will you assess? What are the values you want to instill in your students? How do you expect them to know and master the fundamental and foundational theoretical propositions of your discipline? That's what it is. So if you're teaching a first-year course in sociology, you want to induct and introduce students into the foundational theoretical propositions of the discipline called sociology. But you also want your students to learn how to engage with bodies of text in a critical way. That's what first-year sociology is, as first-year biology, I guess, we want you to do as well. So the first error in the argument is that curriculum equals content, and that's not true. Curriculum is not content. My second concern on this first one. All my concerns are interrelated, but I thought they were worthy of being packaged differently. The fact that you take for granted that curriculum equals content means that almost all the concerns about decolonizing the curriculum are focused on the humanities. Because people say, well, you can't really decolonize mathematics. So therefore, it's okay, leave them. Physics, well, it's purely objective. Don't worry, leave the physicists. They're okay. They don't need to be decolonized. Somebody suggested, which is a bit harebrained, that we should eliminate from our universities all Western science. I mean, what the hell is Western science? The people in the West are the first to put up their hands and say they inherited their science from the Africans, or from the Greeks, or from the Chinese. Newton was not the first person to use the differential calculus. Indians gave the world the concept of a zero. The Chinese were doing differential calculus when London was a rude village where people still painted their faces. So there's no such a thing as cultural ownership of knowledge. But I mean, that's a silly argument, and I don't want to engage with it. There's another extreme on the other side, which I also don't want to engage with, and that is, I once had to deal with a music school where the academics in the music school believe that all you needed to do to teach music is to teach Beethoven, Bach, Berlioz, and Brahms. And all music of the universe emerged from those 4 composers. And therefore, you needed to teach no other. I mean, you can mathematically write different equations for different forms of harmonics. And when I said that to these people, they thought I was mad. Because, of course, who wants to teach jazz or African rhythms or Indian classical music or something? That's not music, that's nonsense. I had to say to those people, all you have to do is just get out of the house a little bit. You live in a small world, you are mindless, and I'm not going to engage with your debate. The idea that medical sciences grew up in Europe, well, that's nonsense as well. Stop that, don't teach it. Get out of the classroom, you are disadvantaged. You shouldn't be standing in front of class if you believe that kind of nonsense. So I don't want to engage too much with that part of the debate. But having made this first error, which is that the curriculum equals the content, you then ignore the role of science in the way in which forms of exploitation has emerged. So to give you an example, South Africa has produced really, really good quality information on the paleo-history of humans. Some of the greatest research has emerged here in this country. Jan Smuts, who was a prime minister in this country, took that research and interpreted it to mean that black people are a deviant branch of human development, that white people are on the correct path, that the black races will die out and they have broken away. So it is possible to take science and interpret it in the service of a political ideology that is brutish. That is why the British love Jan Smuts so much. Because here for the first time, someone gives them scientific justification for racism. Previously, they had to rely on the Bible. God told us to look after these dark-skinned people because they are lesser mortals. Here, for the first time, is scientific justification for racism. What a wonderful thing to have. But this is about science in the service of bad government, bad ideology, bad human behavior. Scientific interpretation also requires values to make sense. I mean, science lives in culturally loaded and politically loaded spaces. Science in the service of Russian totalitarianism, science in the service of European fascism is quite common, is well known. For those of you who read in this time, the rise of fascism in Europe, which of course started in the late 1800s, took 2 world wars to cleanse out of the madness out of their breasts. While that may have been a very frightening experience, what was more frightening in those periods is the number of academics and intellectuals who stood up in support of the rise of fascism. That was even more frightening. And once universities start teaching dogma, where we say there's only one truth and we are the custodians of that truth, then we hurt human society. Universities can never ever stand up to hold up their hands and say, we are the custodians of the truth, you are here to get the handed down wisdom from me, because I am the custodian of the truth. We're in serious trouble, and society must lose its respect for its intellectuals when that happens. My third concern is a derivative concern, but let me put it this way. In arguing that the problem is that the curriculum needs to be decolonized, I'm afraid that what you do is you give more authority to the curriculum than it deserves. In the sense that you argue, my students can only think and be what the curriculum allows them to think and be, which I know is not true. My students will always be more than me. They will always think and know things that I didn't put into my course. I left as a civil engineering undergraduate from Wits University in 1981. I'd read Trotsky. So, incidentally, I did get my first degree in 1981. You know, some of your parents didn't meet each other at that time. But it is possible that my students will think and be more than the curriculum allows them to think and be, and it is to be expected. So I was taught civil engineering at a time when in this country, the standard building regulations had lower pressure requirements for white people than for black people. Sorry, for black people than for white people. So if I was to design a residential area, I had to provide higher water pressure for white people than for black people. It was written in the rules, in the design rules. That was the curriculum. My professors didn't write that the design code. I don't hold them accountable. But what they did have to do is say in the classroom, here are the rules, but this is not what proper civil engineering is about. You may have to do it because there's a law outside and you get into trouble if you don't. But remember, this is not proper, this is uncivilized civil engineering. And they should have told their students that. The fact that they didn't means that they undereducated their students. But I didn't leave the curriculum with an understanding that white people were superior and therefore they deserved their higher water pressure, or that they were more dirty and that's why they needed more pressure to clean themselves. I didn't leave with those conceptions. I understood the stupidness, I knew how to correct it, and I knew why it was not the proper way to do it. I believe that I left the university, as you all must, being able to think and be much, much more than the curriculum allowed you to think and be. Because if you didn't do that, if you leave the university with only what you were allowed to think and be, then you have been undereducated. I want to turn to an experience that happened some time ago. I'm not sure how old you were when it happened. But there were a few white students at the University of the Free State who did terrible things to black workers. And it was video recorded, and I'm not sure if you're aware of that incident. But they treated, in the most humiliating way, they treated black workers, and they did a video recording of it. There was a big hoo-ha. In fact, it produced the Sodian report. It resulted in the Sodian report on transformation. Here's the point. The fact that that video was offensive was not because it reminded us there are racists in this country. You don't have to show me a video to remind me that there are racists in this country. I figured that out for myself, thank you. What was offensive is that those boys were about to graduate. Now, if you leave an institution of learning with those social attitudes, then you cannot call yourself a graduate. Because to be a graduate means essentially to be able to see the world through the eyes of the other. And if you can't do that, you're not really a graduate. But what's more important is the place that you leave from should not call itself a university. Those boys were failed by their institution. In part, I sort of supported the Vice Chancellor's position that these boys have apologized, let's forgive them. Because the real criminal, the real error was in the institution. Because to call yourself a university means to bow down to the universal and to acknowledge the problems of the human condition. And the problems of the human condition will always refuse to acknowledge national boundaries, or ethnic boundaries, or racial boundaries, or language boundaries. Poverty is poverty all over the world, doesn't matter what language they speak. And bad government has the same stench, whether they speak Arabic or French or English or Spanish, it doesn't really matter. And that is the business of the university. The university must always refuse to acknowledge or to limit its learning by conceptions of national identity or tribal or ethnic identity or language identity. The problems of worker exploitation in Scandinavia are as serious as the problems of worker exploitation in KZN or in South America. And the stories, that's why content for me is not really that important. Yes, we must read Cabral. Yes, we must read Steve Biko. But we must also read the story of the exploitation of indigenous Australian people by the colonialists. Because the narrative must travel. And that brings me to my last concern, which is that it sounds like an attempt to essentialize me as an African. That because there's something special about me because of my Africanness, because of the fact that I live on this continent, or because I have a particularly dark skin or a particular texture of hair, but mostly because I'm geographically defined as an African, which then has the effect of removing me from the human condition. I'm special. I'm not like them in Europe. I don't share their concerns, and therefore I am essentialized as a separate entity, and that worries me. There was a time when there was a thing called the Negritude Movement. You were probably too young for that, and I'm going to oversimplify. I'm really oversimplifying, but essentially there was an argument that being African is special, and that Africa was largely a peaceful continent that got along well until these white people arrived to corrupt us. And that what we need to do is inward looking and solve our own problems and keep everything out. Wallace Soyinka gave a two-sentence response to the Negritude movement. He said, tigers do not express their tigritude, they pounce. Iskam Patel took a similar view. I am because I am human. I have the capacity to love like the best in the world, just as I have the capacity to be as brutish as the worst in the world. And I demand the right to be allowed to love and hate as much as I can, because I am human. The township narrative can be found in King Lear. You must go and look for it. I like the idea that Mexican peasants were stimulated to overthrow their bad government by listening to stories of the Russian Revolution. They've never seen snow in their lives. They don't know what a duffel coat looks like. But the human condition story travels, and they heard it and they could hear. I can relate to Mexican Scottishness. British imperialism, English imperialism in Ireland is a serious issue, and we must read about it. Just as we must take the story seriously on our own continent. But let's turn then to I hope I've given you enough of an argument to say that how do we decolonize the curriculum is the wrong question, right? I think, however, there is a decolonizing project, and we have to engage with it. So I'd like to rephrase the question. How do we construct a curriculum in a way that it contributes to the very difficult project of decolonizing minds? Okay? In other words, how do we construct curriculum in a way that makes a contribution to decolonizing minds? Now I think we start thinking of curriculum in new ways. Now it doesn't really matter about what's in the curriculum, as long as we show that it is making a contribution to new ways of knowing. I'm going to illustrate this point by asking the following. Hands up, don't give the answer, but put up your hands if you know who's the first African who wrote a novel in English. Who's the first African to write a novel in English? Here's another question. Who's the first African to translate Shakespeare into an African language? You know the answers because you're Salt Lake University students. both answers are Salt Lake. How many of you? How many of you have read Mohudi? The book is called Mohudi. It's written in English. The main character is a woman, and it's about an ethnic struggle in this part of the world when Zidikazi settled here in the Northern Cape before they went into Zimbabwe. But it was also, it's a cosmopolitan novel. It's a really brilliant novel. In fact, the names on our residences at Salt Lake University are taken from the positive characters in the book. So we have Mohudi Hall, Rachaga House, Moroka House. It's taken from the novel. All our residences will draw their names from the novel, so that will be the coherence, yeah. How many of you have read Native Life in South Africa? Salt Lake wrote Native Life in South Africa in 1916. It was published in 1916 in England because he led the protest against the Native Land Act, which essentially was the most serious turning point in ensuring that black people in South Africa became landless. Salt Lake, of course, was the first Secretary General of the ANC. He was the Gwede Mantashe of the day. He went to England to protest while he was on the ship, and in England he wrote a book. The book was published in 1916. So last year the book was 100 years old. How many of you knew that? When I first met Karl Rasmussen, he recited the opening paragraph of that book from memory. Here's the point. You can see how serious the decolonization project is. In this room, there are 50 people over the age of 18 who have never heard of probably the most seminal part of their own archive. And that's the point about the decolonizing project. You don't take your own archive seriously, how do you expect other people to take you seriously? Yeah? It is, and we should be embarrassed. I'm ashamed, and I said this, I've said it loudly. I walk into a bookshop in India. I find Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom in an Indian Malayalam, South Indian Dravidian language. I can't read it. I have a research relationship there, so I pop into the bookshop again. I walk out of that bookshop looking at my shoes in embarrassment because I can't get that book in Setswana or Shivenda. I can't read Nelson Mandela's work in Setswana. If I want a Setswana copy of Mhudi, I have to go to Botswana to buy one. There's not one available here in South Africa. That's the extent to which we have reproduced and perpetuated this idea that everything that it means to be African is deserving of disrespect. We've done it ourselves. We've done that. Ali Mazrui, in a brilliant collection of essays called The African Condition, which he presented as a series of wreath lectures on BBC Radio. You can download it free of charge. Incidentally, Native Life in South Africa is available free of charge. So even cost is not a reason not to read the book. But if you can download the wreath lectures, and Ali Mazrui makes the following point in one of his wreath lectures. He says, Sub-Saharan Africa cannot claim to be the most brutalized community in the world. But we can claim to be the most humiliated. We can certainly do that. And that humiliation persists. And to me, that's where the decolonizing project is. So we say, well, we're not reading Mhudi in our schools. It's because these white colonialists will not allow it. Well, I'm sorry. Most of the schools in this country are run by black people. And if our young people, Mhudi should be read at standard 8 or what's it now, grade 10. Grade 10 or 11, you should read Mhudi. It should be fairly standard regular reading in our schooling system. I read poetry, Mrs. Sit with a dictionary, I struggle. But I like the idea that there's a rhyme and meter that I can quite enjoy. I like the writing. It's beautifully written. We won't teach it in our schools because it is deserving of disrespect. Therein lies the problem, and we have to start engaging with it. But what we must be careful of is to avoid what Sheikh Anta Diop warns us. Again, here's another great intellectual, African intellectual. In fact, the university in Senegal, in Dakar, is named after him. Here's one of the finest thinkers, I think, on early conceptions of African identity and sociology. And I'm going to read from Diop. When they, that he means the colonizers, explain their own historical past or study their languages, that seems normal. Yet when an African does likewise to help reconstruct the national personality of his people, distorted by colonialism, that is considered backward and alarming. We contend that such a study is the point of departure for the Cultural Revolution properly understood. All the headlong flights of certain infantile leftists who try to bypass this effort can be explained by intellectual inertia, inhibition, or incompetence. The most brilliant pseudo-revolutionary eloquence ignores that need which must be met if our peoples are to be reborn culturally and politically. In truth, many Africans find this vision too beautiful to be true. Not so long ago, some of them could not break with the idea that blacks are non-existent culturally and historically. It was necessary to put up with the cliche that Africans had no history and try to start from there to build something different or modesty. He says again in another paragraph, this is 1967. It could seem too tempting to delude the masses engaged in a struggle for national independence by taking liberties with scientific truths, by unveiling a mythical and embellished past. His point is quite simple. This is not an easy project, and it demands hard, tough intellectual effort. And you're going to have to engage with it, but tell no lies, and don't be disrespectful. And so here's the last point that I'm making in the way that we construct curriculum. One of the best things that we need in understanding the learning needs of our students is to expose them to as many ways of knowing as possible. That's my point about how do you know that you know. You may have heard your grandmother telling you that lightning is caused by the storm bird that lays an egg in the ground. And when the egg hatches, the lightning emerges. Have you heard that story? In Afrikaans, it says stormfall. Yeah, it's a Northern Cape story. You may have heard a story about if you sit under a shepherd's bush, you're not going to be hit by lightning. Well, it now appears that there's scientific evidence for that. In other words, it's a different way of knowing. It is not about Marxist economics versus neoliberal economics. It's about ensuring our students are able to make up their minds about both. And it isn't about Western hegemony and running down African hegemony. To give you an example, most people in this room, except perhaps this fellow, knows 6 words for uncle. My mother's brother is not my father's brother. I have different structured relationships with them. If I'm the academic trying to teach sociology or anthropology, and I only speak English, I only know 1 word for uncle. And sitting in front of me is a class that looks like this, then the lecturer is underprepared. The lecturer must go for a bridging course and be excluded if he or she fails. Because you can't teach me that subject because you have no sense of how it is possible to know in a different way. And so until we can cross over those barriers without privileging any one of them, it's not that the one is right and the one is wrong. But as I said at the beginning, the mark of an intellectually educated mind is an ability to see the world through the eyes of the other. If you can't do that, you may not call yourself an intellectual. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Is there any questions, comments? Okay, I think Dr. Carl, Pilile, you answer. Okay, sequence.
Take the students first.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Professor, for the very enlightening presentation. The one question that always strikes me as a scientist and both someone who was raised in a very religious family is one where people say religion replaced our history. I would like to know what is your take on that, because some of the rituals that we perform in our specific histories or traditions seem to very much contradict what our religious backgrounds tend to go to us, like the killing of animals when we do religious practices tends to contradict a lot of the Bible. So what's your take on that?
So the two things, first of all, there are rules for a body of knowledge to call itself a science. And the primary rule, if you go and read Karl Popper, you should read if you're interested in that area. Karl Popper is probably one of the great thinkers of modern epistemology. And probably the most accessible book, if you're writing it down, is called All Life is Problem Solving. All Life, it's a collection of essays which are quite accessible. He writes in a very accessible way, although the subject he deals with is very complex. But the Popper, Thomas Kuhn, those sorts of people, the requirement of refutability. If you make a statement, I must be able to set up an experiment that, if negative, could refute your hypothesis. So you say gravity always works downwards towards the core of the Earth. If I can set up an experiment that shows that something is actually moving upward, I refute your hypothesis. But I must be able to construct an experiment. So the statement, God, there is a God, God exists, is not a scientific statement. It's a statement of belief, because I cannot set up an experiment to disprove the statement. However, it is a statement of belief, and that's fine. Human beings, we do things even though we may not know why we do. So there's nothing wrong with that. There is a distinction. Your question is a long answer, requires a long answer. There's a distinction between the private space and the public space, and the way in which human beings construct their relationship with each other. And the relationship with this thing called the universe, which is enormous and not understandable, is what we call religion. It has aesthetic value. In other words, it has no utility value. You can't take your religion and go pay the rent with it. Well, some people can, but not you. No. But it has no utility value. So when Maria Callas sings Vici de Arte, she says, I've given my life to the arts. What she means is to religion. God, why am I being treated like this? So go and listen to Vici de Arte again. Beautiful voice. The point that I'm leading to is that you mustn't be concerned about these things as though they are contradictions. One of the marks of a good intellectual is an ability to keep opposing ideas in your head and still be fully functional. So don't worry about it. But also don't be duped into the principle that only scientific rationalism is valuable. Science pretends to be rational. Most of medical science is statistic probability. It's not really a science when you think about it. Take this tablet, you've got a 70% chance of getting better. If you fall at 30%, I don't know. The second thing is, and I'll give you an example. The German concentration camp commander, I remember the story, who did a very careful, accurate calculation of the volume of gas required to kill a human being. His calculations were perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. He then wrote a letter of protest to Berlin that they weren't sending him enough gas, and therefore he couldn't meet his production targets of killing enough people per day. It is possible to be perfectly rational for an unspeakable purpose. That's the point. So rationalism on its own, as I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said, rationalism can tell you which bus to take, but it can't tell you why you're going there. Okay, so don't worry about it. It's not necessarily conflicting, and it's not a contradiction. And we don't have to hold on to our beliefs so firmly as to say that everybody else who doesn't believe as I believe is therefore wrong. You end up like Donald Trump. The only thing that is wrong with you is that you are not like me. And that's nonsense. To live in that you are either with us or against us is a nonsense world. The world will never be reducible to a single entity. Okay. Carl.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. I wanted to step in there because my points all pertain to very, very similar stuff. I wanted to come back, because we've talked about it a lot at the workshop, to your example right at the very start about how you know whether to put a coat on. And to highlight that there are two questions within that. There are scientific questions, which do have an objective answer, and there are ethical questions about how you feel, which don't. So you could actually get a thermometer out, right? And whoever measures the temperature, if you measure it accurately, it's the same. There is an underlying known answer to what the temperature is. But as you say, whether you want to put a jacket on is entirely a subjective. It's an ethical question with no right answer. And anyone who went around enforcing everyone to put a jacket on at the same time would be quite rightly loony. And so we do a lot of it. And of course, Galileo put it very nicely when looking between the two, when particularly he came across your exact issue when he bumped up against the church. In his court case, in his defense, he argued that the Bible should tell you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. And the statement can be reversed for science, right? Science will tell you how the heavens go and not how to go to heaven. It's splitting off the scientific issues, how the heavens go, has a correct, objective, observable answer, whereas how to go to heaven does not. It's an ethical issue. It's about how to live your life, and science is absolutely mute. And lots of the awful things that you mentioned that happened in the name of science happened because people believed that science gave you the answer to ethical questions, and the same with the Pope locking up Galileo. But I'd encourage you all, and I don't know if you've heard it, Richard Feynman, the very famous physicist, gives a lecture on the value of science. And in it he tells a story about Buddhism. And in Buddhism they teach that the key to the gate of heaven also opens the gates to hell. And that they purport that Buddhism imparts the wisdom to know how to use the key. But Feynman points out, and in this analogy, the key is like science. And Feynman points out that although you can demonstrate the key opens the gates of hell, it can do horrible things. It doesn't mean that the key isn't useful, right? The key is inherently useful. If you don't have the key, you can't do either. You can achieve nothing. And so I think it's important to remember that while it did do all of those bad things, that's absolutely sure, for sure, that comes down to the ethical questions of how you use it. And when it comes to building something like a laptop, you need science. It's just the postmodernist or perspectives approach doesn't work. If I have a guess at how to make a laptop and someone who actually knows does, they're going to succeed. I'm not. I don't know how to make a laptop. And just very quickly, I'm glad that you picked up on the content issue. When the debates first arose, my boss, who also wants to speak just now, he bounced into my office and he said, look, they've found that Pythagoras' theorem was predated in Egypt. So actually it's not a European theorem after all, and we can all learn that it came from Egypt. But I was unexcited. I don't think it's so important. I mean, at the time, I don't think any Egyptian would have counted themselves as an African. So all you've really done is move the discovery from one Mediterranean tribe thousands of years ago to another Mediterranean tribe. And I'm not sure that really should be where our conversation is going on decolonization. I don't think that makes a big difference to us in the room now. But thank you, it was a wonderful talk. And I'm so happy.
I'm not sure, is he allowed to ask a question?
That's the chair.
Okay,
he's in charge.
Yes.
It's not actually a question, it's a comment that I've been, I have compared the difference between the so-called educated people, university graduates, and the so-called uneducated, those are the people that never go to the university. I've seen the same pattern of behavior. I'll give an example. Because graduate students are striking, demonstrating, they'll break the windows and do all the things. When the people that the postgraduate students are saying that those are illiterates and are striking, it's a sin. When you walk on the street, you see the educated people doing litter. Then you see again the people that are not doing litter. And to me, it seems like the education is just something for elitism. It's not really helping out to solve the problem, except for commercial reasons.
Okay. One of the most, I spent some time, as I said, I spent time developing civil engineering in Zimbabwe at NUST, and I spent about 8 years doing that. But one of the other things I did was I helped to redevelop higher education in Rwanda after the genocide period. I spent some time with at the invitation of government and so on. And I had occasion to engage with that politiciousness of the Rwanda period. And the stories are horrible. Horrible. See, there's a thing that human beings do. They identify a group of people based on an identity marker. The color of your skin, the shape of your nose, the religion you follow, your Jewishness, if you've got black eyes, etc. And then they say, or your womanness. In South Africa, we do that to women. They say, your opinions do not matter. In the public space, or even in the private space to a woman, a man says, your opinions do not matter. And the minute I can convince myself of that, I am then able to take the next step, which is, I therefore have the right to brutalize you. And we do that. Europe did that to Jewish and Gypsies. If you have black eyes and dark hair, I had the right to brutalize you because my government has confirmed with me that your opinions do not matter. That happened between Hutus and Tutsis in Rwanda. And there was a moment when one group said to the other group, your opinions do not matter. It was, what was it, about 800,000 people killed in 10 months? Mostly with machetes and with knives and so on. Women and children included. What was fascinating for me is that 68 academics and students at the university were killed by fellow academics and students. The churches, the priest called Tutsi people into the church, locked the doors and then called the killers. They set the church alight. When I was there in the 2000s, mid-2000s, there were some churches with dead people in it that had not yet been opened. So religion does not provide that protection. And certainly you can't expect education to provide that, that defense. Because the frightening thing about Rwanda is it says to you, if this madness visits my group, will I be able to say no? And you cannot answer confidently. You really cannot. Because it forces you to ask the question, where do I draw my values from? And here's the point, I think, Rifil, which we must all bear in mind. Just as data is not information, information is not knowledge. But more importantly, knowledge is not wisdom. It is possible to be extremely clever, but completely unwise. And I've met many such people. You go to America, the place is full of them. They produce unbelievable science. I mean, the quality of the science, but they are the most unwise people you can meet in your lives. They still refer to dark-skinned people in using rude words. But the mathematics is beautiful. The biological theories are wonderful. So it is possible to be clever without being wise. And it seems to me that the difference is values. I'm using the word values, let me just define it. You're young enough, I got this when I was in my 20s. So maybe you'll find use for it. Values are the things that regulate behavior in the absence of rules. Is that useful? Yes. Values. So even selfishness is a value, so negative values are possible. What is it that will determine whether you help an old lady cross the street or not with the groceries? There's no rules that say you must. What decides whether you will do it or not is your values. And that's what must inform. So the global economic collapse in 2009 is because the financial world forgot to read balance sheets through the eyes of their values. A balance sheet is a representation of reality. It's not reality. When the balance sheet is growing, because you can give more debt to poor people who are not going to be able to pay, and then kick them out of their houses, your balance sheet has not grown. The numbers may have grown, but you forgot to read the balance sheet through the lens of your values. And that's why you had a global economic collapse. And one of the big questions after the global economic collapse was, what are the business schools saying about this? Because they taught those people to do that. Those people learned to do what they did to poor people in business schools. And so universities don't necessarily give you the defense. But on the other hand, universities can't teach values. Universities can advance, advocate. But the minute we start teaching values, you allow us to become politically dogmatic. And then we say all Catholics need to be chased into the ocean. All Muslims are terrible people, etc. Don't follow those values, follow these values. The university can only encourage good habits and good behavior. The values you have to acculturate yourself. So education on its own does not immunize you to bad behavior. Don't worry about it.
Oh, thank you. Okay, we're having the scenarios.
I have to first at least, we should take a couple more, but I also have to put the director on it, so it's my job.
Okay, let me take a few of them.
I'll call now.
You come, Chris.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. So,
Do I think that's why you've got him? Hello, Sorry, I didn't realize you were starting. You can go ahead, everyone, speaker.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you very much for that very interesting perspective, Prof. I have a couple of points which I would keen for you to respond to. Well, my first point is that no matter which way we look at it, colonialism remains a really important part of our lives. And in my view, it's not something that we should only address in the way that you suggest. And in fact, I believe that colonialism should be something that we should understand better and that we should study. In other words, part of decolonizing our curricula is to study colonialism and to understand colonialism and to understand its influence on our lives. You know, the fact that we drive on the left-hand side, the fact that post boxes are red, or whatever the case may be, much of our lives is inherited through a colonial process, things we take for granted. And I think we need to do that because, which is about my second point, is that, as you pointed out, Prof, colonialism is a universal issue. It's something which didn't only happen in South Africa. It's not something that only happened in Africa. It happened everywhere, really, where in the modern era, the modern form of colonialism is the one that we are familiar with, where effectively European countries colonized much of the rest of the world. Of course, colonialism predates that by a long, long way. But it is universal. We need to understand how it has manifested so that, and this is my key point really, that we can develop our own identity. And I don't believe that we will ever be able to extricate our identity as South Africans from colonialism completely. It's a question of finding what we can comfortably live with as our own South African identity. I often wonder, what is a South African accent? You know, what is a South African? Who is a South African? What is South African as I can say binds us together as a country, as a nation? What is the concept of a country? Is the concept of a country itself a colonial issue? The word Africa, where does the word Africa come from? Is Africa as a continent, as a place? Is that a colonial concept? They are so fundamental to the way we have grown and the way we've developed as people, I mean all people, that to try and define ourselves away from colonialism, I believe, will take us down a path of destruction. It's really a question of redefining our own identity as South Africans, and that's really what I am keen to see emerge from this. And that leads me to a question which I guess I want to ask for your answer on, Prof, both on my comments and also on what you think about this. And the question is about the decolonization protest and the Roads Must Walk protest that we saw all over the country. My question really is, what is it ultimately that the students who led that protest are seeking? Well, and I guess that's what you've been addressing in your lecture, but what ultimately is a solution? In other words, if we try to envision success, which is what I often like to do, let's say that we succeed, or the students succeed in achieving decolonized university. What is that vision? What does it look like? Does it mean that we have got different art on the walls? Does it mean that we have very black lecturers or professors? Does it mean that we change the way the buildings? I don't understand the vision. And to me that's critical to define because I believe that the symbols of colonialism, which are critically important, and I don't pretend that they're not, and the legacy of colonialism, which does materialize, as you pointed out, although not so significantly, so I can't paraphrase what you said, but being that the content of the curriculum is one issue, but so my major point here is that colonialism certainly does manifest in symbolism, the names of buildings, etc. But I believe the questions are deeper than that. The project is deeper than that. The project is not so much about the institution as it is about cultural identity, who we are as South Africans, and how we can feel that we own the country, that we own the university. When I say we, I'm counting myself as one of the protesters. I'm identifying with the protesters. So my final point then is that I see it manifesting in all sorts of ways which are particularly ways in which we can't sometimes distinguish from the real political debate. And I will use my own children as an example. And my own children, sadly, know more about the United States of America than they do about Africa. They are children of conscientized parents, but nevertheless, are children that know more about America because American media has sold us a new form of colonialism, a neo-colonialism. And I'm going to hazard a guess that the students sitting in that room know more about America and more about American media and more about American movie stars or pop stars and music and know more about American cities and about symbols of American cities, which are recognized American cities, quicker than they will be about Africa. And I'm afraid that that is a sad reality. The power of imbalance still exists in the world. And that is a big political debate. It's a geopolitical debate, which manifests in South Africa. And my final point before I hand back is that another issue about lives, like whose lives matter, like Black Lives Matter, for example. This morning on the news, a warning issued 20,000 Somalian children are at the risk of starvation. 20,000, I'm going to say it again, 50,000 died in 2011 in Ethiopia and Somalia. 50,000 people died of starvation in 2011. Now 2017, 20,000 children are at the risk of starvation this year. And we are going to travel. We're going to travel, maybe some of you in the room are going to travel overseas this year. We're going to fly everything. You're going to see America, you're going to see Europe, you're going to see somewhere else in the world. It's really a very short way to Somalia. It's like a 3-hour flight, maybe. But just a bit further than Cape Town is from Johannesburg, for example. And this is happening. And how are we engaging with these issues? And that's another whole debate, I guess. And I just wanted to say about just make my point about conscientization of ourselves. I think that we cannot speak all together on the stop and just ask for some response if there is any. Thank you.
Thank you, Neville. You'll get your answer in about 2 minutes with a delay.
Can I say, I think those are important questions, but I think that Neville is badly constructing the problem. I'm an enemy of the rainbow nation. I really don't like the metaphor. Because what we've done is we've persisted as being a series of parallel identities that refuse to acknowledge each other's archive. There are families in this country who've been here for 5 generations who still cannot greet in an African language. You have to say to them, your life, the normal in your life is not normal. It is impossible that you can live in a country for 5 generations and still don't know how to greet in an African language. But am I saying that all the Afrikaners must become isiZulu? No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I don't want you to lose your Afrikanerness. I don't want you to lose your Tswananess. You must be able to express your Tswananess in the best way possible, but in a way that stands alongside everything else that means South Africa. I don't want to see a single unified identity called South African, because that's American melting pot model, which is equally nonsense. I don't want you to deny the reality of your identity or of your past. You go to America, and by the 3rd generation, people have forgotten what the Italianness means. They are now American. They eat burgers, they get fat, they don't worry about anybody else in the world. The world exists because America exists. By 3 generations, they've been indoctrinated into that attitude. I don't want you to do that. I really don't. Because there's something about Africa that we do often overlook. Choral music in South Africa, human voice in song in Africa, does not have a lead singer. Human voice in harmony is what we are looking for. Collective human voices in harmony is what we are looking for. The idea of the big leader doesn't fit with us very comfortably. Neville is right to point to starvation in Somalia, but Neville's also wrong. Last year, of the children who died in the Northern Cape, 1 in 10 died of starvation. I don't have to go to Somalia to deal with the problem. The problem is real and I must connect with it. But I've forgotten that actually in the Northern Cape, of the children who die, 1 in 10 die of starvation. Here's a problem where a child is dying because we can't put a bowl of porridge on the table. There's the measure of service delivery failure. That's the real measure. That's not a failure of a family. That's a failure of a whole society. Because last year, one of the most lucrative car dealerships in Gauteng was the Porsche dealership. And in the Northern Cape, children were dying of starvation. Let's engage with this thing real. The problem is right here. And the local is not in conflict with the globally excellent. We'll deal with the local problems. But as we engage with the local problems, we also hopefully contribute to more meaningful ways of the world understanding itself. Africa has much to learn from the rest of the world, but we also have much to teach. We really do. We do things in ways that Russians should sit up and take seriously, because we've solved problems that they're still struggling with. But equally, we want to know how they've solved the problems that we struggle with. And that's what the conversation is about. Without ever feeling that we need to apologize for our blackness, for our Africanness, for our family identity. I never apologize for that. People say, oh, you're from Africa, it's okay, you can be second class, you don't have to be as good as everybody else. I hate it. It's a corrosive form of racism that expects less from black people. I'm polite, I don't fault about it. But then we stoop to conquer because we are such giants. So, I mean, I think Neville raises some interesting issues. Neville still seems to be stuck with decolonizing curriculum. The point about understanding colonialism is essential. But remember, my argument is not that the primary source of decolonization is the curriculum. The curriculum must contribute to the process of decolonization of minds. The curriculum is only one contributing component. Refilo's question was correct. How do you get other people outside of the university? Because not only university students need to be decolonized. But we also have to get a sense, to come back to the point you was asking about what is the meaning of the roads must fall movement and the symbolism issue. The point that students are making is less about the symbols. I mean, symbols are symbols, and I'll come to that. It's about the fact that by act of my blackness, I am an excluded student. I studied at Wits University when there were 10,000 students, 100 of us were black students. I sat on a train 1.5 hours every morning and every evening, 1.5 hours, because we weren't allowed to live in the residences. Black students got on a train and went home to the township every day. That was it. And you did your tutorials like this in the train. That's how you did your radio tutorial and your notes, because it was third-class train, workers were full. I know what alienation means. The first time I asked a question in class was in final year. I thought these white people were going to think I'm stupid. There were only 2 black students in my final year class, 3. 2 of us finished that year and 1 finished the year later. But the point is that I knew always that I didn't belong. I'm here to get an education and then I go home. I'm a black student at Wits. I am not a Wits student. I was consciously, continuously aware of that. And our students are saying, your institutions are still like that. That the fact that you treat us as separate means that you must think differently. That they are targeting symbols, I think was incorrect. I mean, to throw shit on a statue is not intellectual discourse. That for me is just cruel brutishness. For somebody who has never heard the Christian narrative, to see an image of a man nailed to 2 pieces of wood is a brutish image. I mean, if you don't know Christianity, you will say, what are these people doing? They are bowing down to a man nailed to 2 pieces of wood, through his hands and his feet. Yeah, this is a violent society. But when Christians who know the narrative look at the crucifix, They don't see a man nailed to 2 pieces of wood. They see mercy, forgiveness, honor, all the good human qualities. So symbols have meaning because the society agrees on them. That's what we do. We say, this is not a man nailed to 2 pieces of wood. This is forgiveness, mercy, everlasting life. That's what it is. The fact that it actually is a man nailed to 2 pieces of wood is irrelevant. The fact that it sizzled on Rhodes, for me, is irrelevant. Rhodes University. Fort Hare was much worse. I mean, Major General Hare apparently was charged with the task of exterminating the yellow blacks in the Eastern Cape. Well, Hare was much worse than anybody else. We're not going to change the name of the university. I know that university as the university where the great anti-colonial intellectuals emerged from. That's where Nelson Mandela came from, and a whole range of great thinkers. So I'm not going to change the name. We own the name now. It no longer means that hooligan who came here from England. It means something else to us. So symbols take meaning because we give them meaning, not because they have inherent value. In the end, it's just a man sitting on a chair or on a horse. That's all it is. And as I said, the crucifix is not simply a man nailed to 2 pieces of wood. The crucifix means a lot more than that. So careful with symbols and how you interpret it.
Okay, thank you. Let me allow the students.
Okay. If I haven't answered the question already, thank you.
No, okay, I don't know what is the question, but I just wanted to talk about the significance of language, because I think that the issue of decolonizing the curriculum, all that has to do with language, right? Because when you learn a language, it means like the process, you also learn the culture. So then the issue of decolonizing the curriculum actually talks of the issue that firstly, like mostly we learn English, which means now we're more exposed to the English kind of culture. Why does the culture like it's English? So I think this particular initiative actually wants us to be able to also like have an appreciation of our own culture as Africans. And it's not supposed to be distorted, right? And then, so I happened to be in a lecture, this lecture on decolonizing the mind, when we get to talk about the issues to do that as Africans understand better our own mother language, right? So which means that when we're taught in English, you find that most students, they fail not because they are not intelligent, but that because of the language that they've been taught, right? So then I think like the issue of language actually is really important when we look at the issue of decolonizing the curriculum, right? And then my second point comes to the issue of like I go to deeper when you talk of the issue of environment, like the word statue does not contribute much also, because I think the environment around us is the one that actually talks to us, right? Because I'll give an example of the Eastern Cape. It's called East London. You have streets named Oxford, Cambridge, right? So to some extent, you see that it's more like, colonialism is there. You get it? So the moment we change the streets or the cities and all that, the environment around me talks to me, and it makes me feel that I'm more African rather than being in a place where it's called East London. It's like some kind of whatever. So I think like the issue of environment around you actually contributes into the decolonizing of the mind.
Correct. Let me go in reverse order. I mean, I agree with you. What you and I will agree with is that what you can't do is privilege one form of symbolism. That's the problem you're dealing with. So the fact that we've changed street names and town names in South Africa to essentially acknowledge black people or black experiences has not necessarily contributed to people feeling more connected with their cities. The people protest in townships still happening, even though the city now has a local African name. The point is not that the names themselves give meaning. It's that what you must be careful is not to privilege a particular cultural identity. So you may well say, we'll have an Oxford Street that happens to intersect with the Nelson Mandela Avenue. There's nothing wrong with that. But what you're going to do is you're going to hurt yourself if you say there will be no European names. There will only be isiZulu names. Then those who are not isiZulu feel a little bit left out, etc., etc. So what I'm saying is it's about cultural privilege, it's cultural privilege that we want to avoid. The other idea is that there is also meaning that emerges from more than the symbol, which is the point that I made. So there's a statue of Cecil John Rhodes on a horse here in Kimberley. If you didn't know who it is one of the finest examples of that genre of artwork in the world. Everybody in the world who takes an interest in artwork of men on horses comes to Kimberley to look at this particular one, even if they don't know who the person is. So there's an artistic merit in the symbol that may be worth preserving for other reasons. Okay? Can I come to the issue of language? And you're raising two separate points. I'm not romantically associated with African languages. I don't have a romantic association. But what I do think, the reason that I think it is important that you learn another language is not because you understand the culture. It's more because you get access to another way of knowing. My example of family relations. If you only speak English, you cannot really understand family connectedness because you don't have words for it. English uses the same pronoun for an adult as for a child. They say you. Go to your grandmother and say you and see how far you'll get. Exactly. So that notion of family connectedness, age, relationships, etc., arrives if you engage with the language. In other ways, you cannot know it. Because to call somebody malume or in the Indian equivalent would be mamu, has very serious meaning. And it means a connectedness that English doesn't know about. That's why you get access to another language. There's another reverse point. If you only speak one language, you live in an intellectual prison. You are seriously, seriously intellectually disadvantaged if you can only speak one language. And that's why it is essential to know another language. That it be, I mean, it's obvious that it should be an African language if you live in South Africa. But if you're living in Mozambique, then maybe Portuguese is a good idea, etc. But to get access to another way of knowing is an unbelievably liberating experience. The second point you're making about language is not so much language, it's the discourse of knowledge. You were talking about students failing. Students don't fail because they can't speak English. Students fail because they don't engage with the discourse of knowledge in their home languages. I could set my exam in civil engineering in isiZulu and ask my students to answer in isiZulu. They'll still fail because they haven't been acculturated into the habit of mind of externalizing ideas using language. That is why you explain the Southeast Asian student who's never spoken English in their lives, who goes to Imperial College or MIT and is a top first-year student. They know the words in their home language. They simply need to find the equivalent in English. Our students, mostly even in their home languages, use it so badly that they don't know how to externalize knowledge. And you know where it comes from? From creative writing. The place where you learn how to externalize ideas using words is in creative writing, not in textbooks or dictionaries. And here, that's the other problem in South Africa, is we've neglected creative writing in African languages. And so what we've ended up with mostly is badly codified township language, which is deteriorating into a patois, and it no longer has any rules. I mean, you speak Setswana in Kimberley, they use Afrikaans, Setswana, and isiXhosa in the same sentence. Ask them, those who are locals. So I think the language issue is essential, but we need to engage with it. So what Plaatje University is doing, we're starting a center of excellence in creative writing in African languages. And we're hoping to contribute to a body of work that can start giving meaning to the discourse of knowledge.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything. I
Longer than I expected, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I believe you joined us to see so that you answer the question. Oh, guys, we let's see. So yeah, for now we break for tea and go to bathrooms. Then we come back.
Can we back at 11:15, please?
11.
11:15.